Okay, there we go. Hello. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elise, and I run the Octopus, which is an OCD advocacy and recovery shop. And I'm here tonight to answer people's questions about living with OCD. And I see we already have some questions lined up, so we will just get right into it. Okay. All right. Hi, how do I deal with existential OCD and questioning reality and constantly ruminating on these feelings or emotions? So again, something that's going to come up a lot tonight is just in general working with a professional that is familiar with OCD, which is something I really love about an OCD, that it gives people in a lot of different places the opportunity to do that. And all OCD subtypes are treated similarly. The best standard would be through ERP, which is exposure response prevention. I think, and also with ruminating, what's important is that you notice that you're doing it in the first place and then trying to redirect your attention, especially if you have that urge to just keep thinking about something. I know I definitely get like that a lot. All right, let's see. We have a lot of questions coming in. And there we go. Okay. I used to have, let me make sure that my face is still over the question. I used to have good outcomes with ERP, but now it seems like my thoughts linger forever with my obsessions for months. What else can I add to help me dull them now that time doesn't help like it did? So this is a difficult question for me to answer because I can relate to you. When I was younger and I first did ERP, I felt that a lot of my obsessions went away. But I also know now that the goal of ERP is not for it to go away. It's for you to live your life anyway. So habituation is when you kind of get used to the thought and it goes away. That doesn't always happen, which I know is really unfortunate and probably not what you want to hear, but it's important to stay focused on just living your life anyway, and that I think may help it dull over time, just constantly redirecting to what you actually want to be paying attention to. But I can definitely relate to that. I've noticed that also, that some obsessions do linger around while other ones go away more quickly. But as long as you are doing what you want to do with your life and not giving into compulsions, I think that is the main purpose. So I hope that's helpful. I know it's not perfect. All right, let's see. Okay. What do I do to make my parents believe I have OCD? I have PRO and my compulsions are researching and being distressed by my thoughts. They say it's an extreme OCD, so they don't believe me. So I'm really sorry to hear that they don't believe you. I know that that kind of situation makes things a lot more difficult. It makes it more difficult to feel supported in treatment and feel supported in your recovery and what you have to do. And having a support system is really important in recovery. So I am really sorry to hear that. You can try sending them articles and things from NoCD's website. They have a lot of information. You also could try getting your therapist involved with them in some sort of family session. That's another way to help them get educated on OCD, have a professional help them do it rather than putting all of that onto you. The tough answer would be that not everyone is going to understand your OCD. I know it's so painful if your parents are some of those people, but that is definitely something you could talk to your therapist about as well, how it feels to have them not believe your OCD and not have them on your side in treating it. So I would recommend talking to your therapist about it, seeing if maybe they can explain it to your parents in a family session, and sending them articles and links and different things such as that so that they can learn more about OCD. Which, be careful, because remembering that researching is a compulsion of yours, so probably want to keep that to a minimum. And let's see. Any advice on real event OCD? The guilt can be insanely overwhelming. So this is not a subtype that I have a lot of particular experience with. I am going to say this over and over tonight probably, but I always believe in working with a professional if you are able to, and especially since an OCD currently has support groups that are free, using that as a resource if you're not able to afford treatment. I do know that the guilt with a lot of different themes can be overwhelming, and I think talking about that with your therapist, but also trying to redirect your attention. Like, I'm thinking of some of the intrusive thoughts I've had over the years that gave me a lot of guilt, and actually redirecting my attention and not giving into compulsions made me feel less guilty over time, because the actual obsession seemed less important. Because I think doing the compulsions reinforces the fear, which reinforces the guilt that you're actually doing something wrong. Because if you're not afraid of it, then you're not going to think you're doing something wrong, if that makes sense. Let's see. I asked this before but couldn't get an answer. Maybe it's a weird question relating to OCD. I had shy bladder syndrome since high school that only recently went away. Do you think OCD can also go away in a similar fashion? So OCD tends to wax and wane for people throughout their life. People have really good times in recovery. Then they might have a relapse. It's very common for it to come and go. Some people maybe do go through treatment and do feel that their life is completely different and that they feel totally recovered, and some people do not feel that way. It's very individual. Unfortunately, it's very hard to say for someone else, but what you can definitely do is take recovery into your own hands and work towards it. But it's different for everybody. Currently going through a very rough patch for the first time in years. How do I cope with knowing this will be for the rest of my life? Ebbs and flows. It's kind of related to what we were just talking about. Also, I didn't say this when I opened, but I also have OCD, if you haven't gathered that already, and I've had OCD since I was a child. So I've definitely been through a lot of ebbs and flows in my life. I think what helps me is maybe thinking about the times when it was less intense and remembering that those times also happen. I also find it helpful to connect with others who can relate to the lifelong process and experience of having OCD, like in support groups, meeting other people who have that kind of experience. I think that is helpful for sure. It's definitely a really hard thing to grasp, and grief about it coming and going will also come and go. So I encourage you to let yourself feel the grief, though, because it really is a hard thing to deal with. I actually feel like there may be something about that on OCD's website, so maybe something to check out too. How do I deal with mental health anxiety? I'm constantly worrying about having very serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia or DID, or dissociative identity disorder, I believe is what that stands for. So I've also actually had this obsession before, or this kind of anxiety focused on serious mental illnesses. I think what helped me most was when I would realize that I was obsessing about it and redirecting my attention to something in the moment that I actually wanted to focus on instead of that. All themes really end up the same. I know that may seem like insensitive to hear, but I've been through a lot of different themes, so it's really just whatever flavor I'm feeling at the moment. This is a very strong flavor that I've had before, but now it doesn't bother me as much, and that's mainly because I stopped giving attention to the obsessions when they would pop up, like about, oh, what if I develop schizophrenia? And I decided that I could worry about that some other time, but it takes a while to get there. So I definitely get that. And I know that is very common anxiety that people have. All right, let's see. I think I lost my place in the questions. Okay, wait, there we go. About blasphemous ERP. It is tricky because those ERPs are considered sins, and one with this OCD doesn't want to sin. Also, because of the fear of punishment, which may be later. Thanks. I do not totally understand the question here, so if you could rephrase that into a question, I can try to answer it. I don't have clearly defined or obviously intrusive thoughts because I'm ruminating 24/7. Is this normal? Like literally every waking moment is consumed. I guess my question would be what you are ruminating about. I would also probably argue that it's not normal. Like I wouldn't say it's normal, like neurotypical or like something that mentally people without mental illness would be doing. So I definitely think that you deserve to feel better and go hopefully find some help that can help you ruminate less, because I don't imagine that everyone feels that way all the time. But there must be like a concept that you're ruminating about. So maybe also, honestly, this kind of works in your favor, I guess. From what I've been saying is that the theme doesn't matter. So really it's going to be about learning how to redirect your attention from ruminating anyway. So the like not having definition of the thought actually isn't really going to matter. And what I've noticed with OCD too is that my brain will run so fast that I often don't know exactly what I'm ruminating about either. But so at that point, it would be good to just do something that would redirect you into the moment instead of getting caught up in your head and letting the present go by. Okay. This kind of came up before too. My OCD is better, but my anxiety is lingering. How do I deal with that? Also, full disclosure, I'm not a professional in any way. Like I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just a peer who has experience with OCD. So I'm always going to suggest bringing it up to any professionals that are treating you. I know some people do have co-occurring diagnoses, like they might also have a different anxiety disorder in addition to the OCD, so that may be part of what's lingering. Or if you just mean the feeling of anxiety about what you, so maybe you're still having anxiety, but you're not doing compulsions, which is great. That's amazing. That goes back to what I said before about how the goal is not to not feel anxiety, it's to not do compulsions, which I know is not always the most fun answer, but it is what will lead you to living a life of your values instead of what OCD wants. So it's learning to act with anxiety rather than waiting for the anxiety to go away. But I would definitely talk to your therapist about that, or a support group of some kind may be able to help with that also. Can OCD be related to self-hatred? I guess I would need to hear more about this. Like in what way? Because it definitely can be related to it. Like I would think that OCD can definitely lead to self-hatred because people can be disgusted with their thoughts and intrusive feelings, urges, thoughts before they realize that it's not their fault and not something that they can control. I think that's something that a lot of people with OCD struggle with, but if that's not what you were trying to say, feel free to ask again in a different way. Okay. My OCD makes me question if I love my mom and family. How do I easily dismiss these thoughts? I also get these feelings and I don't like them. They make me scared that I'm losing my morals. I think this is a very common experience in OCD. I can definitely relate to what you're saying, worrying that your values at your core are actually changing because of these intrusive feelings you're having. I think what's also important is that values endure and feelings are temporary, even really uncomfortable ones. I wouldn't say, I think what's important too is you said, how do I easily dismiss these thoughts? And I don't think anything about this is easy. If I'm making it sound like it's easy, then I apologize, because I don't think it's easy at all, literally, not at all. So I really feel for you, because I would definitely also be distressed by those thoughts. I've had similar thoughts like that made me very uncomfortable. I wouldn't say that you can easily dismiss them, but I would try to act how you want to act. So if you want to be, or I know that gets confusing if you're having intrusive feelings, that you might want to act a different way, but you could spend time with your family while you're having those thoughts and feelings and wait it out and see as the anxiety builds and then eventually goes down, and that may help you. But, and also I think even, I'm trying to think, my values have come back after anxious episodes. So sometimes I honestly just feel like I'm just hanging in there until it passes, or riding the wave is another metaphor that people tend to use for that. But it's really hard to learn, but the more you do it, the more familiar you get with it. So just sitting through how you feel and waiting until you're on the other side of it. Let's see. Oop, oh boy, hang on. I am having trouble. Oh, I have a mouse. I should use the mouse. Okay. I'm borrowing someone else's computer for this, so lots of uncertainty for me. Okay. Suggestions to handle insomnia with OCD. So I'm trying to think if I've had insomnia with OCD before. I can think of some times, possibly. Honestly, when I've had trouble falling asleep, what's helped me the most is letting go of the pressure to fall asleep, which is really hard, especially because I've had health anxiety a lot of my life. So the idea of getting less sleep makes me anxious that something's going to be messed up and I'm not going to have a good day because I'm not going to feel well, etc. Yada, yada, goes on and on forever. I think letting yourself stay up is honestly what usually helps with insomnia, with related to OCD with me. But insomnia in general, I know it would be like putting your screens away a couple hours before bedtime. You might play relaxing music. You want to make sure that your room is dark and cold enough to go to sleep. So those are just general sleep hygiene tips. But when it comes to OCD being tied in it, I tend to just try to not resist the fact that I won't fall asleep. I try to stop forcing it. And I know for insomnia too, in general, they talk about getting out of bed if you're not falling asleep instead of trying to force yourself to fall asleep. Can themes merge together? Sometimes my existential OCD combines with my harm, so my brain will say, if nothing is real, I will hurt or kill someone. Yeah, no, it definitely, themes can definitely merge together. Your brain can say literally whatever it wants all the time, and it will. And with OCD, it will be whatever you really don't want it to say to you. So I can definitely relate a lot to what you're saying here. Yeah, it can be, it could be literally anything. It can make no sense at all. So, which is very terrifying. But after it's happened for many, many years, I feel like you may start to get a little more used to it. That's what happened with me, at least. But definitely possible to have themes that feed on each other. I know relationship OCD and sexual orientation OCD tend to feed off of each other a lot too. Let's see. Okay. This is an interesting one. Why does OCD change themes? So I definitely don't have a formal, educated answer, but I have my own guesses on why this probably happens. I think OCD changes themes because it's looking for danger, and if you eventually realize that a theme is not dangerous, it's going to look for something new because it doesn't have to look for danger in that area anymore. And I think it just will keep looking for something new to put in its place. It is very irritating that it does this, but what's nice is that treatment does work the same way for all the themes. So if you have the skills for one theme, you can apply it to a different theme. But that's my reasoning, I guess, is that just OCD always needs something to do. It's very hypervigilant and it wants to find something. So it will find something if your old thing isn't bothering you anymore, it will find something new to bother you or to be bothered by. Let's see. Okay. Any advice on how to not ruminate so much when dealing with stress from intrusive thoughts? So I've been saying this a lot, but like redirecting to an activity that you would normally be doing if you didn't have, or if you weren't having intrusive thoughts. So for example, I know I sometimes have intrusive thoughts while I'm driving. I try to look around on the road to, like, instead of trying to figure out why I had that thought in my head, I'll make myself focus on the road, which is always good. But also, there's grounding techniques like naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can, I think I have trouble with this. 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste, or something like that. So grounding techniques are really good, doing things with your senses. Something to pull you back into the present moment, because rumination takes you out of the present moment, and it challenges the OCD because you want to keep thinking about it, and you're fighting that urge to keep thinking about it and doing something that does not involve thinking about it. So like sometimes people have, like, I've been taught to have really sour candy to have something to focus on for a sensory experience, so that might help. And that is a helpful action if you have rumination and you're trying not to ruminate. But if you want to avoid, then you would not want to do something like that, because that would just distract you. And the idea would be to go into it, because remember, we always want to do the opposite of what OCD is telling us to do. So if it wants us to harp on it, then we want to not think about it. Like, we want to do something else. Oop, that's too far. How has accepting uncertainty helped you with your OCD issues or treatment journey? I also feel like eliminating reassurance as a compulsion makes me feel like a loss of a support system. I can agree with that. A lot of my friends who have OCD and I have talked about the line between reassurance and validation, and it can be very hard to see for someone with OCD, but I think what's important to remember is that reassurance is about getting certainty, and there are ways to get validation and support that are not about getting certainty. So someone being like, actually, I just saw an OCD posted about that today, so you could check out that post. So it had some statements that people can say that are not about they're about how to support someone without giving them reassurance, like saying that, and it was for yourself, I'm pretty sure, like saying that you're proud of yourself, that you can handle this, and I'm going to do what's best for me, things like that. And as far as accepting uncertainty, what's helped me with accepting uncertainty is that it makes me feel more free to not figure out the answer, because when I realize that uncertainty is an option, I realize that I don't have to expend all this energy compulsively looking for the right option. Okay, I feel like having OCD has traumatized me. When it wanes, I regret all the time I lost, and I feel afraid of intrusive thoughts coming back like a monster waiting around the corner. Is this common? I think this is very common. I know a lot of people who have gotten treatment for having trauma from having OCD, especially if it's gone undiagnosed and untreated for a long time. So that's very common. And I've seen a lot of work around people talking about OCD and grief. We do lose a lot of time to compulsions and possibly a lot of time in our lives doing things that we could enjoy. So it's really hard to lose that time. And I definitely understand being afraid of it coming back. But I think also sometimes that's another point that people can use for treatment, accepting the possibility that it might come back. So that could also be something to talk about with anyone that you're working with on your treatment team. Let's see. Okay. Any tips for those of us with a mix of health OCD, contamination OCD, and fear of COVID? Yeah, that's me. I have medical conditions which also make me very high risk. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, because it's definitely a scary time for anyone with medical conditions that make them high risk, regardless of if you have OCD or not. And then adding OCD makes it even more complicated. I know that one tip we've had throughout the pandemic for people with OCD is to follow CDC guidelines and try not to go too far past them, and use that as a marker of how we want to behave. In your case, I would say maybe the CDC guidelines plus what your doctor says, making sure you don't ask your doctor more than once, like what the recommendations are for people with your condition. But it's not wrong to follow restrictions that the CDC says. Like you're allowed to follow restrictions that other people are following too. We don't have to go against everything that our OCD says, because, I would just stick to what the CDC says. That way you don't have to rely on like OCD versus not OCD on how to act in that situation. That's what I've done. So the CDC says that people who are vaccinated are allowed to travel, then I travel, even though I'm like, is that really a good idea? Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're going to change it tomorrow and I should wait and see. But that has worked really well for me with the pandemic. Okay. I also feel like my intrusive thoughts are causing me to change in a way that I do not want to change. Much like the person above said, I don't want to get comfortable with harmonicity. It scares me. No, I definitely can relate. Harmonicity was a really, really challenging subtype for me. And honestly, it's like that is the hurdle that our therapists want us to jump over in treatment. They want us to be willing to trust that something might happen. And that's when you realize like that you can live like this. So that's like the cliff that they want you to jump off of. And that on the other side is where the big change happens. Let's see. Okay. I've heard there are volunteers with no CD that help connect new people with therapists and respond to messages from users. Do you have any info about this? So from what I understand, I do not know of any volunteer roles at NoCD. I do know that that's a job, and I did recently look on their careers page, and care advisor, I think, kind of falls under what you're describing. So those are jobs that you could potentially apply to. And NoCD is always growing, so I'm sure it would be great to apply to that. I do also know, so I don't know about connecting people to resources. NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has their own helpline, and they are volunteer run. There's also, so that would probably be an interesting thing to check out. And Crisis Text Line is another organization that helps people who are in crisis via text or via phone, and they train you, and that is a volunteer position that people can get as well. Actually, let me see. I can write comments, so I will do that so that you can have it. What was the other one I just said? Crisis Text Line. Oh, and NAMI helpline. Okay. All right, let's see. Let's see. Am I really this far in the questions? I'm very surprised. Okay. Let's see. I did the ERP program here on OCD, and it helped me a lot, but I feel like my progress was and still is super slow and steady. It took months to be able to deal with a few difficult thoughts. Normal. Definitely happens to people. My own progress with OCD was slower than I think I expected it to be. Especially if you've had OCD a long time and untreated and undiagnosed. It can take a really long time to change the way that you thought every single day. Your brain is very used to thinking like that. So it is definitely normal for it to take time. And I've noticed OCD treatment tends to really build on itself. So if you, it may seem slow in the beginning, but I think it's exponential in growth. Like once you get a good handle on it, you can apply it to a lot of different situations and that'll help. But definitely nothing to be concerned about. Everyone works at their own pace, and I can definitely relate to the progress feeling slow. As long as you said it was slow and steady, so steady, that's great. That's important. So hopefully you see the returns come in faster soon. All right. Let's see. Do we have any other last minute questions? I see we still have 23 people here, so if anyone has any questions, I'll give it a minute to see if anyone sends anything in the chat. Let me take this down so you can see my face. Also, if you haven't checked out the OCD support groups, I highly recommend you do so. I've gone to 2 different ones, and I really enjoyed them. I think they're really awesome, and you can do that by going on their website or looking on their app. And for anyone who came in later, I run The Octopus, which is an OCD advocacy and recovery shop, and that is what my handle is right here, so you can follow us. We do a lot of different advocacy as well on our social media platforms. So we are on TikTok. I love TikTok. And we're on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think I'm going to end the live for tonight. I appreciate you all being here and being open about your experience with me and sharing your questions. So I hope everyone has, I do see one more question. Let's see. Are the support groups good for people with social anxiety? They would be great for people with social anxiety because they'd be an exposure because you'd be meeting people. So I highly, highly recommend that you check it out. I think that would be a great exposure for you. And if there's a few more questions, we will keep going. Okay. Is there any correlation between OCD, ADHD, and or autism? I do not know what the correlation is, but I do know that there is one. All of these conditions are considered conditions that make someone neurodiverse. And I do know that there's definitely overlap between all of them. I know some people personally who have 2 or all 3 of these conditions. So there's definitely a relationship there. I'm just not sure exactly what the relationship is. But I do follow one ADHD newsletter, and they did a whole segment on OCD and ADHD. There's a lot of overlap between all 3 of these conditions. It can be sometimes hard to figure out which is which. Have you dealt with harm OCD? If so, how did you deal with it? I have dealt with harm OCD, and I went to therapy, and I talked about it with my therapist, and I just stopped. Over time, I was able to stop giving as much attention to the thoughts. I still have intrusive harm thoughts, but I don't think about them very long because I'm very good at returning to what I'm doing in the moment, just letting them go by. But it took a really long time to get to that. So if it hasn't happened for you yet, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but definitely keep working at it. It's definitely possible. I thought my life was totally over when I started having harm OCD, so it can definitely change, which I know is really hard to believe, but I'm proof of that. And I would not lie about that. That was one thing that I really thought was going to ruin the rest of my life, and I am here, and I actually don't think about it that often at all, which is amazing. I just hear that 30% of people with OCD have ADHD. I cannot confirm or deny that fact, but I do know that there's an overlap, and I know that there's also a high correlation between autism and OCD. And with that, I think we are going to wrap things up. Feel free to all right. This is the last one. Okay. When you've had relapses in the past, was recovery quicker due to previous treatment / ERP? Yeah, no, definitely. I knew exactly where to go when I was having issues. So where I could get a refresher on ERP and my previous treatment. Once you have the skills, it's a lot easier to know what to do when you're entering a relapse. So as long as you're willing to commit to using the skills, I think that is going to help you, and you can get those skills with no CD. So I'm just volunteering to do this, but I do really love them. They're a really great company, and they're doing really amazing work. So I'm glad that you all were able to find them. And I hope you check out their next live, which I'm sure will happen very soon. And it was great to talk to you all, and feel free to follow me over here at my handle. Have a good rest of your night.